I'm going to be completely honest with you all. When I got that text message on day 5 of my first real vacation in 3 years, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity was so insane that my brain couldn't process it any other way. The message came from a number I didn't recognize. Said her name was Lana, and she was confused about the move-in timeline because there was still a bunch of stuff in her room. Her room. The room I'd been living in for the past 4 years while I rebuilt my life and bankrolled my parents' entire existence, but sure. Her room, now, apparently. I called back immediately because what else was I supposed to do? Lana answered and sounded genuinely apologetic, like she had no idea she was stepping into a nuclear disaster. She explained that my parents, Helena and Xavier, had rented her the room 2 weeks ago, showed her the space, took her deposit, and told her she could move in the following Monday. That Monday was in 3 days. She'd stopped by to drop off some boxes early and was surprised to see my gaming setup still there. My clothes in the closet, my entire life just sitting there like I still lived there. Because I did still live there. I had never mentioned moving. I had never agreed to move. I was on a vacation that my parents had encouraged me to take because I'd been working myself into the ground for years and never took time off. I told Lana I'd be home in 6 hours and hung up. Then, I called my mom, Helena. She didn't answer. Called my dad, Xavier. He didn't answer either. I tried 4 more times each during my drive back and got nothing but voicemail. Here's the backstory that matters. I'm Anton, I'm 28, and I moved back in with Helena and Xavier 4 years ago after losing my job during a bad economy stretch. I work in IT doing remote contract work now, and I'd been paying them $800 a month in rent, plus buying most of the groceries and covering the internet and streaming services they used constantly. The house is a 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, and my room was the largest bedroom upstairs with the best natural light. My parents had the master bedroom, and the 3rd bedroom was Xavier's messy storage room full of his old tools and equipment he never used. When I moved back in, Helena made this huge speech about family helping family and how they'd always be there for me. Xavier said it was temporary and I should focus on getting back on my feet. I appreciate that they let me move back in, and I tried to be a good tenant, kept my space clean, didn't bring the drama, paid on time every single month, even fixed things around the house when they broke, because Xavier's back problems meant he couldn't do maintenance anymore. But there was always this tension. Helena started making comments about a year in about how I should be doing better by now, how other people my age were buying houses and getting married. Xavier would grunt in agreement and make jokes about me being a permanent fixture. I ignored it mostly because I was saving money and planning my next move, and frankly, their mortgage was way less than any apartment I could afford on my own while still putting money away. Then about 6 months ago, the comments got worse. Helena started calling me a parasite at dinner, just casually, like it was a normal thing to say to your kid. Xavier would laugh and say I was getting too comfortable, that I needed a fire lit under me to actually do something with my life. I asked them directly if they wanted me to move out, and they'd backtrack immediately. Say they were joking. Say I was too sensitive. I planned this vacation specifically to prove I had my life together. Saved up extra money, booked a cabin upstate, told them I'd be gone for 7 days. Helena got all emotional about it and said she worried about emergencies. What if something happened to the house while I was gone? What if they needed to get into my room for some reason? I made the idiotic mistake of leaving them my spare key for emergencies only. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, Helena's car was there, but the house looked normal from outside. I let myself in through the front door and went straight upstairs to my room. The door was open. That was the first sign. I always kept my door closed. My gaming setup was gone. The custom PC I'd built myself, the monitors, the expensive chair I'd saved up for, the desk, completely gone. My bookshelf was empty. My closet had someone else's clothes hanging in it, female clothes in sizes I definitely couldn't wear. My dresser drawers were cleaned out. The walls were bare where I'd had posters and my framed certifications from work courses. My bed was still there, but it had different sheets on it, some floral pattern I'd never seen. There were boxes stacked in the corner with Lana written on them in marker. I stood there processing this for maybe 30 seconds before I heard Helena coming up the stairs. She walked past my room, saw me standing there, and actually jumped like she'd forgotten I existed. She recovered fast, though, crossed her arms and asked what I was doing back so early. I told her I'd gotten a text from Lana asking about move-in logistics for her room, and maybe Helena wanted to explain what was happening. Helena shrugged. Actually, shrugged. Said I was 28 years old and it was time to grow up. She and Xavier had decided to rent my room to someone who would pay real money, not the pathetic amount I was contributing. Lana was paying $1,200 a month and didn't expect them to subsidize her lifestyle. I asked where my belongings were. Helena said they'd sold most of it on Facebook Marketplace over the past 2 weeks. The gaming setup went to some college kid for $900. My books went to a used bookstore for maybe $40. My clothes that didn't fit in the boxes they'd packed were donated. My posters and personal stuff were in the trash because nobody wanted that junk. I asked about the money from selling my belongings. Helena said they kept it because I owed them back rent for being such a burden all these years. Said I barely paid anything anyway, and they were finally getting market rate for the room. Xavier came upstairs then, and he was smirking. Asked if I was happy now, if this was the wake-up call I needed. Said I'd been freeloading long enough and maybe now I'd stop being such a parasite. He told me the couch in the living room was available if I wanted to crash there for a few days while I figured out my next move. But they expected me gone within the week, because Lana was a paying tenant, and they didn't want drama. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just looked at both of them standing there acting like this was completely reasonable behavior. And I smiled. I actually smiled at them and said, okay, I'd figure something out. Helena looked almost disappointed that I wasn't fighting back. Xavier told me there were some boxes of my remaining stuff in the garage if I wanted to go through them. I went to the garage and found 3 boxes of my things thrown together carelessly. My laptop was there, thankfully, and some clothes and random personal items that apparently weren't worth selling. My important documents were mixed in with old t-shirts. Photos of me as a kid were just loose in one box, some of them bent. I loaded the boxes into my car, came back inside and asked very calmly if they had my spare key. Helena handed it over without comment. Then I left. Drove to a motel for the night because I needed to think and I couldn't be in that house for another minute. That was 4 days ago. Here's where it gets interesting. The call started the next morning. Helena called me 6 times. Xavier called 4 times. I didn't answer. They left voicemails that went from annoyed to concerned to borderline panicked. The messages said they needed to talk to me urgently, that there was an issue with the house that required my immediate attention, that I was being childish by ignoring them. By day 3, the messages got more desperate. Helena left a voicemail crying about how I needed to call them back right now, how this was serious, how the house was in danger and they needed my help. Xavier's messages were angry at first, then shifted to almost pleading, saying we needed to discuss the situation like adults. I haven't called them back, haven't responded to any of it. Because here's what Helena and Xavier don't know, or maybe forgot, or maybe just never bothered to think through. 4 years ago when I moved back in, they were in serious financial trouble. Credit cards maxed out, medical bills from Xavier's back issues, Helena's car payment they couldn't afford. They were 2 months behind on their mortgage and the bank was sending warning letters. I had gotten a severance package from my old job and I had savings. I paid off their immediate debts. But more importantly, I did something they apparently didn't remember in their rush to humiliate me and steal my belongings. I've been sitting in this motel room watching my phone blow up with increasingly frantic messages from both of them, and I'm planning my next move very carefully. They wanted me to grow up and stop being a parasite? They wanted to teach me a lesson about real life? I'm about to teach them one right back and they're going to regret every single second of what they did. Update coming soon. This is going to be satisfying. Update 1. Okay, so the comments on my last post were incredible, and yes, to everyone who guessed I have some kind of leverage over the house. You're absolutely right. But it's even better than most of you thought. And watching this play out is giving me the kind of satisfaction I've been waiting 4 years to feel. Let me back up to where I left off. My parents had been calling non-stop for 4 days, leaving increasingly unhinged voicemails about emergencies and the house being in danger and how I was being immature by ignoring them. I watched every single call come in and didn't touch my phone. Just sat in that motel room eating takeout and planning exactly how I wanted this to go. On day 5, I finally texted Helena back, kept it simple, asked what the emergency was and why I should care given that they'd stolen and sold my belongings, kept the money, and told me I was a parasite who needed to get out of their house. She called me within 30 seconds. I answered. Helena launched into this frantic explanation about how there was a problem with the mortgage refinancing they'd been working on, how the bank needed some documentation from me urgently, how this was time-sensitive and could affect their ability to keep the house. She kept saying they could explain everything if I would just come home, so we could talk like adults. I asked her why I should help them with anything. She switched tactics immediately, started crying about how I was her son and family was supposed to help each other, how they'd let me live there all these years and this was how I repaid their generosity. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. Xavier called me 2 hours later. His approach was different. He was angry instead of crying. Told me I was being a selfish brat and they needed this resolved immediately because the bank had a deadline. Said I was putting their entire financial future at risk over some childish tantrum about my stuff. He demanded I come to the house the next day to sign whatever the bank needed. I said I'd come by on Saturday afternoon. That was 2 days away. Xavier tried to argue that it needed to be sooner, but I hung up on him. The Reddit comments about them being in panic mode were spot on because their behavior over those 2 days was absolutely manic. Helena texted me probably 40 times with variations of how urgent this was, how I was being cruel, how she couldn't believe I'd abandoned my parents like this. Xavier left voicemails that alternated between threatening and pleading. One message he'd be saying he'd always known I was ungrateful and worthless. The next he'd be talking about how we were family, and families worked through problems together. I didn't respond to any of it, just let them spiral. Saturday came and I drove to the house around 2 in the afternoon. Both their cars were in the driveway and I could see them watching from the living room window as I pulled up. I grabbed my laptop bag because I'd need it for what I was planning to show them. Helena opened the door before I could knock. She looked terrible. Hadn't been sleeping by the look of it, eyes all red and puffy. She tried to hug me, and I stepped back. Told her we needed to talk, but I wasn't there for emotional reunions. Xavier was sitting at the dining room table with a stack of papers in front of him. He looked stressed, but still had that arrogant edge to him, like he thought he could still control this situation. I sat down across from them and asked them to explain exactly what was happening with the mortgage and why they needed me involved. Helena started talking about how they'd been trying to refinance to get a better interest rate, how the bank had approved them initially, but then, during the final paperwork review, there was an issue with the title and ownership documentation. She kept looking at Xavier like she wanted him to explain the technical parts. Xavier took over and said the bank had discovered that I was listed on certain documents related to the house, and they needed my signature to complete the refinance. He was being vague about what documents, and I called him on it immediately. I asked him to specify exactly what I was listed on. He got defensive and said it was complicated paperwork from when they'd been having financial trouble years ago, that I'd helped them out and they'd added my name to some things as a formality. This is where I opened my laptop. I'd spent the past 4 days organizing everything I had from 4 years ago. Every document, every bank statement, every email and text about their financial situation. I'd already known exactly what leverage I had, but I wanted them to see me lay it out piece by piece. I pulled up the deed to their house, the one that showed my name, added as a part owner. 4 years ago, when they were drowning in debt and about to lose the house, they didn't just need my severance money to catch up on payments. They needed someone with actual income and good credit to convince the bank not to foreclose. Their credit was destroyed, and the bank wouldn't work with them at all. The solution was to add me to the deed as a partial owner. I put down $15,000 of my own money toward their back payments and late fees. In exchange, they added me as owning a 30% stake in the house. We had a written agreement that I'd signed with them, drafted by a lawyer I'd paid for, stating that my ownership stake was real and legally binding, and that I'd continue paying monthly toward the mortgage and household expenses. I'd been paying my $800 rent plus all those extra bills for 4 years. That wasn't rent to them. That was me paying my share of the mortgage and expenses as a part owner. Helena's face went white when I showed them the deed on my screen. Xavier tried to bluster through it, said that was just a technicality to satisfy the bank at the time and everyone understood it wasn't real ownership. I pulled up the signed agreement we'd all signed, the one that explicitly stated I was a legal part owner with all rights and responsibilities that entailed. The one that said any major decisions about the property required agreement from all owners. The one that specified they couldn't sell or significantly alter the property without my written consent. Then I asked them if renting out my room without my permission counted as significantly altering my use of the property I partially owned. Xavier started yelling. He said I was being ridiculous, that I'd been living there as their kid, not as some kind of landlord, that the ownership thing was just paperwork to help them out, and I was twisting it into something it wasn't meant to be. I asked him if he thought a judge would see it that way, given that I had 4 years of bank records showing my consistent payments, receipts for household expenses I'd covered, and documentation of everything I'd contributed as a part owner. Helena started crying harder. She said they didn't understand the legal implications when they signed that agreement, that they thought it was just temporary to get the bank off their backs. She said the lawyer I'd hired had made it sound like it wasn't a big deal. I reminded her that they'd read every page before signing it, that the lawyer had explained everything clearly, that they'd agreed to all of it because the alternative was losing their house entirely. Xavier switched tactics. He said fine. If I wanted to be technical about ownership, then I needed to sign off on the refinance so they could get better rates and we'd all benefit from lower payments. He slid the refinance papers across the table to me. I didn't touch them. I asked how much they'd made from selling my belongings. Helena said it wasn't about the money, that they'd been trying to teach me a lesson about responsibility and adulthood. I asked again, how much? Xavier finally said around $1,400 total from everything they'd sold. I asked about the $1,200 per month they were getting from Lana. Xavier said that was their business decision as the primary homeowners, and they were entitled to rent out space in their house. I told them I wanted $1,400 returned to me immediately for my stolen property. I wanted all my remaining belongings that they'd packed up returned to me properly, and I wanted a formal written apology from both of them for theft, for the verbal abuse, and for attempting to illegally rent out part of a property I partially owned without my consent. Xavier laughed. Actually, laughed at me. He said I was delusional if I thought they'd apologize or pay me anything, that I should be grateful they'd let me mooch off them for so long. So I told them I wouldn't be signing the refinance papers. Not now. Possibly not ever. The silence after I said that was incredible. You could see both of them processing what that meant. Helena started stammering about how I couldn't do that, how I'd be hurting myself too since I was part owner. I told her I was fine with keeping the current mortgage terms. I'd continue paying my share monthly as I had been. They were the ones desperate to refinance. Xavier demanded to know what I wanted, what it would take for me to sign. I stood up, told them I'd let them know when I figured that out. I suggested they start by returning my money and apologizing, and maybe we could negotiate from there. Helena grabbed my arm and begged me not to leave, said we needed to resolve this now because the refinance deadline was in 2 weeks. I pulled my arm away and told her she should have thought about deadlines before selling my belongings and calling me a parasite. I walked out, got in my car, and drove back to my motel while my phone exploded with calls and texts. But here's where it gets even more interesting. And this is the new problem they created for themselves that they don't even fully realize yet. Lana texted me that evening. Remember Lana, the woman they rented my room to? She said she'd moved in 3 days ago as planned and everything seemed fine at first, but Helena and Xavier had been acting increasingly stressed and weird. She'd overheard them arguing about me and about money problems, and she was getting concerned about whether the rental situation was actually legal and stable. She asked me directly if I was actually moved out permanently or if there was some kind of dispute happening that she should know about. I called her. We talked for about 20 minutes and I explained the entire situation, that I was a part owner of the house, that my parents had illegally rented out my room without my permission, that I'd never agreed to move out, and that she might want to reconsider her living situation because this was going to get messy. Lana was furious. She'd paid first month last month and a security deposit, total of $3,600. She'd left her previous apartment and had nowhere else to go on short notice. She asked if I was going to kick her out. I told her I wasn't going to kick her out immediately because I wasn't going to displace someone who got caught in my parents' scheme. But she needed to understand that they'd had no legal right to rent that room and I couldn't guarantee anything about the stability of her living situation going forward. She asked if she could get her deposit money back from them if she left. I told her she could try, but given Helena and Xavier's financial state, I doubted they'd give it back easily. Lana said she needed to think about her options. She thanked me for being honest with her and we hung up. 10 minutes later, Helena called me screaming about how I'd contacted Lana and was trying to sabotage their rental income. I told her Lana had contacted me, and I'd simply told her the truth about the legal situation. Helena said I was trying to ruin them financially on purpose. I asked her if she'd told Lana that I was a part owner before renting her the room. Silence. I asked if she'd mentioned to Lana that the rental arrangement might be legally questionable. More silence. I told Helena that she and Xavier had created this mess themselves and they'd have to deal with the consequences. Xavier got on the phone, and his approach was different this time. He tried to reason with me, said they'd made mistakes, but we could fix this together. He offered to pay me back the $1,400 in installments if I'd sign the refinance papers and let the Lana situation continue until they could figure out an alternative. I told him I'd consider it if they gave me a full written apology and returned what was left of my belongings immediately. He tried to argue about the apology part and I hung up on him. This morning I got a text from Helena saying they'd pulled together $700 and could give me that as a first payment, and they'd have the rest within 3 weeks. She said my remaining belongings were still in the garage and I could come get them whenever I wanted. She also said Lana had given them notice that she was moving out at the end of the month and wanted her deposit back, and they were going to have to use the money I was demanding to pay Lana's deposit instead. So maybe I could be flexible about the timeline. I haven't responded yet, because here's what I'm realizing as I sit here going through all their increasingly desperate messages. They still think they can manage this. They still think they can juggle the refinance deadline, the Lana situation, paying me back, and somehow come out okay on the other side. They still don't understand how completely I can destroy their entire financial life if I want to. And I'm starting to think I might want to. More updates coming. This is just getting started. Update 2. The comments telling me to go scorched earth were prophetic, because that's exactly what happened, except it wasn't even me who lit the match this time. My parents did it to themselves, and I'm just watching the whole thing burn with a front row seat and snacks. So, where I left off, Helena had texted about scraping together $700 and needing the rest of my $1,400 to pay back Lana's deposit since she was moving out. I didn't respond because I was busy talking to a real estate attorney about my exact rights as a partial owner and what options I had going forward. Turns out I have a lot more power in this situation than even I initially realized, and I'll get to that. But first, the family drama that exploded over the past week and made everything 10 times more complicated. Helena called her sister Tara. My Aunt Tara lives about 40 minutes away, and she's always been the family peacekeeper, the one who tries to smooth over every conflict and make everyone get along. Helena apparently told Tara some heavily edited version of events where I was refusing to help them with urgent house paperwork over a minor disagreement about my stuff, and I was being vindictive and trying to ruin them financially. Tara called me on Wednesday evening. I actually like Tara. She's always been decent to me, and she genuinely means well, even if she can be pushy about family unity. She asked if we could meet up to talk about what was happening with Helena and Xavier, because she was worried about everyone. I agreed to meet her for lunch on Thursday at this diner near her work. When I got there, Tara had apparently also invited my Uncle Archie, her husband, which should have been my first warning that this wasn't just a casual conversation. Tara started by saying she loved me and she knew I'd been going through a tough time, but family was supposed to support each other, and Helena was her sister, and she was really struggling right now. She said Helena had told her that I was blocking some important financial documents that could help my parents get better mortgage rates, and couldn't I just sign whatever they needed so everyone could move forward? I asked Tara what Helena had told her about my belongings. Tara looked confused. She said Helena mentioned there'd been some miscommunication about my room while I was on vacation, but that wasn't really the important issue right now. So I told her everything. The sold gaming setup, the trashed photos, the donated clothes, the money they kept, being called a parasite, the stranger's clothes in my closet. I pulled up photos on my phone that I'd taken of my gutted room and the boxes in the garage with my stuff just thrown in carelessly. Tara's face changed as I was talking. Archie was just staring at the photos, looking increasingly angry. When I finished, Tara said she couldn't believe Helena would do something like that there must be more to the story. I showed them the text from Helena where she'd justified selling my stuff and keeping the money. I showed them Xavier's voicemails where he'd called me a freeloader and a parasite. I explained the ownership situation with the house and how I'd saved them from foreclosure 4 years ago. Archie asked why I hadn't mentioned the ownership thing to family before. I told him honestly that it hadn't seemed relevant. I was living there, paying my share. Everything was fine until they decided to steal from me and humiliate me. Tara tried to rationalize it. She said maybe Helena and Xavier were under a lot of financial stress and made some bad decisions, that they probably regretted it now, and I should give them a chance to make it right. She said holding up the refinance was only hurting everyone, including myself. I asked her if she'd give someone a chance to make things right after they'd stolen over $1,000 of her belongings, sold them, kept the money, and told her she was worthless. She didn't have a good answer for that. Archie was more direct. He said Helena and Xavier had screwed up badly, and I had every right to be angry. But at some point, I needed to decide if I wanted to be right or if I wanted to have a family. He said making them suffer financially wasn't going to undo what happened, and I should think about the long-term consequences of burning these bridges. I told him I'd been thinking about long-term consequences for 4 years, while I rebuilt my life and helped keep their house from foreclosure. And Helena and Xavier clearly hadn't been thinking about consequences when they decided to betray me the second I left for a week. The lunch ended badly. Tara was crying and saying she just wanted everyone to work things out. Archie told me I should talk to a family counselor or mediator before I did anything I'd regret. I paid for my own meal and left. That night, Helena called me furious that I'd told Tara everything and made her look bad to her own sister. I told Helena she'd made herself look bad by doing what she did. Helena said I was poisoning the family against her and I'd regret turning everyone against my own parents. Then things escalated in a way I didn't expect. My parents apparently have a friend named Helena. Yeah, same name as my mom, which gets confusing, but this is Helena with the last name different. Their neighbor from 2 houses down. Neighbor Helena is in her 60s and she's been close with my parents for years. Neighbor Helena showed up at my motel on Friday morning. I have no idea how she found out where I was staying, and that creeped me out immediately. She knocked on my door, and when I opened it, she pushed her way in and started lecturing me about respecting my elders and how disgraceful it was that I was treating my parents this way. I told her she needed to leave. She refused. She said my parents had taken me in when I had nowhere else to go, and I was repaying their kindness by trying to steal their house from them. She said she'd known me since I was a kid, and she'd never thought I'd grow up to be so ungrateful and cruel. I asked her what my parents had told her. She said they'd explained that I'd moved back in during a hard time and they'd tried to help me get back on my feet. But I'd taken advantage of their generosity, and now I was using some paperwork loophole to extort them. I told her that wasn't what happened, and she needed to leave my motel room immediately or I'd call the front desk. She called me disrespectful and said I was going to end up alone in life if I kept treating people like this. Then she finally left. I called the motel front desk anyway and told them someone had shown up uninvited and found my room number somehow, and I didn't want anyone given information about my stay or room location. The desk clerk apologized and said they'd make a note, but the neighbor Helena visit shook me more than I wanted to admit. It meant my parents were actively campaigning to make me look like the bad guy to anyone who would listen, and they were apparently telling people where I was staying. I called Lana to check on the situation at the house. She said things were tense. Helena and Xavier were barely speaking to her, and there had been some kind of blow-up with a neighbor that she'd overheard through the walls. She confirmed she was definitely moving out at the end of the month, and she'd already found a new place. She also mentioned something interesting. She'd gotten a notice from the city about an unpaid water bill that was overdue by 3 months. The notice had been left on the front door and she'd given it to Xavier, who'd gotten angry and said it was a mistake. But Lana had looked at the notice and it clearly showed a balance of over $800 owed. I asked her to take a photo of the notice and send it to me. She did. The water bill hadn't been paid since before I left for vacation. That lined up with something I'd been suspecting, that my parents' financial situation was even worse than I'd realized. I pulled up my own bank records and looked at the timeline of payments I'd been making. For the past 6 months, I'd been paying $800 in what they called rent, plus covering the internet bill and most of the groceries. But I'd stopped paying for other utilities about a year ago because Helena had said they'd handle those directly. I started wondering what other bills weren't being paid. Property taxes would be escrowed with the mortgage, so those should be current. But utilities, insurance, other maintenance. What else was falling behind? The real estate attorney I'd consulted had explained that as a partial owner, I had a responsibility to ensure the property was maintained and bills were current. But I also had the right to demand accounting from the other owners about where money was going. If Helena and Xavier were mismanaging the property finances, I could potentially force a partition sale, basically forcing the house to be sold and splitting the proceeds according to ownership percentages. I didn't want to go that far yet, but I wanted them to know I could. So I texted Helena and Xavier in a group chat. I told them I'd received information that utility bills were overdue, and I needed a full accounting of all property-related expenses and payment history for the past year. I reminded them that as a part owner I had the legal right to this information. Xavier texted back that it was none of my business how they managed the bills, and I should focus on signing the refinance papers if I actually cared about the property. I told him that actually it was my business since my credit and ownership stake were tied to the property's financial health, and if they didn't provide the accounting voluntarily, I'd get it through my attorney. Helena called me crying again. She said they were behind on a few bills because of unexpected expenses with Xavier's medical issues, and they were trying to catch up, but it was hard with just their fixed income. She said the refinance was supposed to help them get lower monthly payments, so they could afford everything better. I asked her how much they were behind on bills total. She wouldn't give me a number. She just kept saying they were handling it, and I was making everything worse by refusing to cooperate. I told her I wanted the full accounting by Monday, or I'd assume they were hiding something worse. She tried to argue, and I ended the call. Sunday afternoon, Xavier showed up at my motel. I don't know how he found me either since I'd told the desk not to give out my information, but there he was knocking on my door. I didn't open it. I talked to him through the door and told him to leave. He said we needed to talk man to man, that this had gone far enough. He said they'd gotten my $700 together and had it ready for me, and they'd get the rest within 2 weeks. He said they'd apologize formally, if that's what I needed to hear. He just needed me to sign the refinance papers because the deadline was in 4 days, and if they missed it, they'd be stuck with their current rate for at least another year. I asked through the door if he had the accounting I'd requested. He said they were working on pulling everything together. I told him to come back when he had it and not before. Xavier got angry then. He said I was acting like a spoiled child, that I clearly had no idea what it was like to manage a household and finances at their age. He said I was so focused on punishing them that I wasn't thinking about how this would affect me too when the property value and equity took a hit from their financial problems. I told him that if they'd thought about consequences before selling my belongings, we wouldn't be in this situation. He kicked my door and left. I filed a complaint with the motel about him showing up. They checked their cameras and confirmed he'd followed another guest through the security door to get to the room floors. They banned him from the property. This morning, I got an email from an attorney. Not my attorney, their attorney. The email said he was representing Helena and Xavier in a property matter, and they were requesting I sign the attached refinance documents or provide written explanation for my refusal to do so. The email had this formal, threatening tone, like they were building a legal case against me. I forwarded it to my own attorney and asked what we should do. My attorney called me an hour later and he was actually laughing. He said their attorney was grasping at straws because there's no legal basis to force a part owner to agree to refinancing. And if anything, the email just documented that they were trying to pressure me into a financial decision I had the right to refuse. He said if I wanted to apply real pressure back, I should send a formal letter through him demanding the property accounting, documenting all the issues with unpaid bills and mismanagement, and putting them on notice that I was considering forcing a partition sale if they couldn't demonstrate financial responsibility. I told him to draft the letter. He said he'd have it ready by tomorrow, and he'd send it certified mail so there was proof they received it. But here's the thing that's really getting to me now, and I'm asking for advice here because I genuinely don't know how far to take this. My Aunt Tara called me this evening. She said Helena had broken down completely at a family gathering yesterday and admitted that their finances were worse than she'd told anyone. They're not just behind on utilities, they're behind on the mortgage again too. They'd missed 2 payments trying to scrape together the money for the refinance costs. And for paying back Lana, the refinance was supposed to lower their payment enough that they could catch up and stabilize. But without my signature, they can't get it through. And now with Lana moving out, they're losing that $1,200 monthly income they'd been counting on. Tara begged me to reconsider signing the papers. She said Helena and Xavier were terrible at asking for help, and they'd made huge mistakes, but they were genuinely desperate and terrified of losing the house. She offered to mediate a family meeting where everyone could talk through what happened and come up with a solution. I told Tara I'd think about it. Because here's what I'm wrestling with. I have them exactly where I want them. They're financially trapped, they're desperate, they're facing consequences for what they did. The revenge is working. They're suffering. But they're also my parents. And they're in their early 60s. And if I push this all the way to forcing a house sale, they'll have nowhere to go and probably no way to buy another place with their credit and limited income. Part of me says they deserve it. They stole from me, humiliated me, treated me like garbage. They never once considered what their actions would do to my life when they sold my belongings and called me a parasite. But another part of me is starting to feel like maybe I'm taking this too far. The Reddit comments on my last posts were split between people saying to destroy them completely and people saying to take the high road and help them on my terms. I honestly don't know which is right anymore. What I do know is that they're getting the formal demand letter tomorrow, and they'll have to decide how they want to respond. And depending on what they do, I'll decide my next move. This is getting heavier than I expected. Update coming after I see how they handle the attorney letter. Final update. For everyone who said I should take the high road and work things out with my parents, I didn't. For everyone who said to burn it all down, I did exactly that. And I'm here to tell you how it ended because the fallout has been massive, and I've never felt more vindicated in my entire life. The attorney letter went out certified mail on Tuesday morning. My parents signed for it Tuesday afternoon. By Tuesday evening, my phone was exploding, but I'd expected that, so I was ready. Helena called first, and she was hysterical. She was screaming about how I'd hired a lawyer to attack them, how I was threatening to steal their house. How could I do this to my own parents? I let her rant for about 2 minutes, and then I told her very calmly that the letter simply requested financial documentation I was legally entitled to as a part owner, and if she had nothing to hide, then providing it shouldn't be a problem. She said I was trying to humiliate them by making them prove their finances to me like they were children. I reminded her that she'd humiliated me by selling my belongings and calling me a parasite, so maybe she should consider this a learning experience about consequences. Xavier got on the phone, and his approach was pure aggression. He said I'd crossed a line by bringing lawyers into family business, that I was making this into something it never needed to be. He said if I wanted to play legal games, then they'd play too, and their attorney had already advised them of multiple options for dealing with a hostile co-owner. I told him to have his attorney contact my attorney then, and I hung up. Their attorney sent a response letter on Wednesday. My attorney forwarded it to me, and we went over it together. Basically, their position was that I'd abandoned the property by moving to a motel, that my ownership stake was questionable because I'd never made full market rate contributions, and that they were pursuing options to have my ownership interest deemed invalid or bought out at minimal value. My attorney said it was all bluster with no legal foundation. The ownership was ironclad, properly filed, properly documented, with 4 years of payment history backing it up. The abandonment claim was ridiculous because I'd been forced out when they illegally rented my room, and there was no mechanism for them to just eliminate my ownership without my consent. He drafted a response that was basically a legal middle finger. It reiterated my demand for full financial accounting, added a demand for them to immediately cease any rental arrangements using the property without my written consent, and included a formal notice that I was prepared to file for partition sale if they continued to be uncooperative. Thursday morning, Helena called me from Tara's house. Tara got on the phone first and begged me to agree to a family meeting before the lawyers made everything worse. She said Helena and Xavier were willing to apologize and work out a payment plan for my belongings, and couldn't we all just sit down and talk through this like adults? I asked Tara if Helena had shown her the financial accounting yet. Silence. I asked if Helena had explained exactly how bad their money situation actually was. More silence. I told Tara that she was being used as a mediator without having the full picture, and maybe she should ask Helena to show her the unpaid bills before she kept pushing for reconciliation. Helena got back on the phone and said I was poisoning her relationship with her own sister. I said I was simply telling the truth, which was apparently something Helena had trouble with. She said fine. They'd get me the financial documents if that's what it would take to make me stop this legal action. I told her I'd review whatever they sent and we'd go from there. The documents arrived Friday afternoon via email. It was a PDF packet of bank statements, bills, and a handwritten spreadsheet that was supposed to show property expenses. I went through everything with my attorney on a call that lasted almost 2 hours. The situation was so much worse than I'd imagined. They weren't just behind on utilities. They were behind on the mortgage by 3 months. Not 2 like Tara had said. The missed payments had triggered penalty fees and a warning letter from the bank about potential foreclosure proceedings. They owed $2,100 in property taxes that should have been paid in January. The homeowner's insurance had lapsed because they hadn't paid the premium, meaning the property had been uninsured for 6 weeks. The water bill was $847 overdue. Electric was $430 overdue. They had a bill from a tree removal service for $1,200 that was in collections. My attorney did the math. They were at minimum $12,000 behind on property-related expenses, and that wasn't counting whatever personal debts they had. But here's the part that made me absolutely furious. Their spreadsheet showed they'd been collecting my $800 monthly payments and marking them as rental income, not as my ownership contribution toward the mortgage. They'd been pocketing my money and not applying it to the actual mortgage payment for months. That meant my credit was potentially at risk because the mortgage was in both our names as co-owners, and they'd been defaulting on it while taking my money. My attorney said this was serious financial mismanagement and possibly fraud. He said I had grounds to force an immediate partition sale based on their failure to maintain the property and their mishandling of co-owner funds. He said if I wanted to pursue it aggressively, I could probably also file a civil suit for the misappropriated funds. I told him to file for partition sale immediately. Saturday morning, I drove to the house. I'd called ahead and told Helena and Xavier I was coming, and they needed to be there. When I arrived, both their cars were in the driveway and Lana's car was gone. She'd already moved out, apparently. I walked in without knocking since I was still a legal owner. Helena and Xavier were sitting at the dining room table, and they both looked terrible. Helena's eyes were swollen from crying. Xavier looked like he'd aged 5 years in 2 weeks. I sat down across from them with my laptop and the printed financial documents they'd sent. I told them I'd reviewed everything and I knew exactly how bad things were. I asked them directly why they'd been taking my monthly payments and not applying them to the mortgage. Xavier tried to argue that they'd been using the money for property expenses and it all went to maintaining the house anyway. I pulled up the mortgage statement showing missed payments and asked him to explain how my money went to property expenses when the actual mortgage wasn't being paid. Helena started crying and said they'd gotten behind because of Xavier's medical bills from his back problems, and they'd been trying to juggle everything, but it got away from them. She said they thought the refinance would fix everything, so they'd been prioritizing other bills to keep services on. I asked why they hadn't told me the mortgage was behind when I was literally living there and paying them every month. Xavier said it wasn't my concern because they were the primary owners and they were handling it. I told them they clearly weren't handling it, and now my credit was at risk because I was on the mortgage paperwork for a property that was in default. Helena begged me to sign the refinance papers. She said they'd gotten an extension on the deadline until next Friday, and if I signed, they could get caught up on everything and fix this. She promised they'd never touch my money inappropriately again, that they'd set up a proper system for tracking my contributions. I asked her why I should trust them with anything after they'd stolen from me and lied about where my money was going. She said they'd made mistakes, but they were still my parents and didn't that count for something? Xavier cut in and said I needed to think about what forcing a house sale would do to all of us. He said the property value was around $340,000, and if we sold in a forced partition, I'd only get my 30% minus selling costs and the remaining mortgage balance. He'd done the math, apparently. I'd walk away with maybe $85,000 at most, and I'd be giving up my stable living situation and burning my relationship with them forever. I told him I'd been thinking about that, actually, and I'd decided that $85,000 and never having to deal with them again sounded perfect. Helena made this choking sound. Xavier said I couldn't be serious. I pulled up my laptop and showed them the partition sale filing that my attorney had prepared. I told them it was being submitted to the court on Monday morning unless they agreed to my terms. Xavier asked what terms. I told him that first, they were going to pay me back every cent they'd taken from my monthly payments that should have gone to the mortgage. Based on the statements, that was $4,800 over the past 6 months. Second, they were going to pay me the $1,400 for my stolen belongings. Third, they were going to provide me a written apology acknowledging exactly what they'd done and taking full responsibility. Xavier said they didn't have $6,200 to give me. I told him they should have thought about that before stealing from me twice. Helena asked what would happen if they did all that. Would I sign the refinance papers then? I told her no. I was done with this arrangement entirely. If they met my terms, I'd agree to sell them my ownership stake at a fair price rather than forcing a partition sale. My attorney had gotten an appraisal. My 30% was worth roughly $95,000. They could buy me out and I'd walk away, or I'd force the sale and we'd both deal with the court process. Xavier exploded. He said there was no way they could come up with $95,000 plus the money they owed me. I told him that sounded like a problem they'd created for themselves. He said I was trying to make them homeless out of spite. I said no. I was protecting my financial interests from people who'd proven they couldn't be trusted. Helena tried a different approach. She said she understood I was angry and I had every right to be, but destroying them financially wouldn't undo what happened. She said if they lost the house, they'd have nowhere to go at their age, that Xavier's back problems meant he couldn't work, and their only income was his disability and her part-time job at the library. I asked her if she'd thought about any of that before selling my gaming setup, before trashing my photos, before calling me a parasite and telling me I was worthless. She said they'd been wrong, but making them suffer worse wasn't justice. It was revenge. I told her she was absolutely right. This was revenge, and she'd earned every bit of it. Xavier said if I went through with this, he'd make sure everyone in the family knew what kind of person I really was. He'd tell everyone I'd abandoned my own parents to financial ruin over a grudge. I told him to go ahead because I had documentation of everything they'd done, and I'd be happy to share it with anyone who asked. The conversation went in circles for another hour. They alternated between begging, threatening, trying to guilt me, trying to negotiate. I didn't budge on anything. Finally, Xavier said they needed time to figure out their options. I told them they had until Monday morning when the partition filing went through, and after that it would be out of all our hands and up to the court. I left them sitting at that dining room table looking completely defeated. Tara called me Sunday morning. Helena had apparently called her the night before and told her everything. The real extent of their financial problems, the missed mortgage payments, the partition sale threat. Tara was angry with me now. She said I was being cruel and vindictive, that I had the power to help my parents and I was choosing to destroy them instead. I asked Tara if Helena had told her about taking my monthly payments and not applying them to the mortgage. Silence. I asked if Helena had mentioned selling my belongings and keeping the money. Tara said that was wrong, but it didn't justify what I was doing now. I told Tara that she was welcome to help Helena and Xavier come up with $95,000 if she felt so strongly about it. Otherwise, she should stay out of it. She said I'd regret this someday and hung up on me. Monday morning, my attorney filed the partition sale petition. Helena and Xavier had until the court date to either buy me out or prepare for forced sale. The court date was set for 3 weeks out. Monday afternoon, I got a call from their attorney. He said his clients were willing to agree to a payment plan for the buyout, $10,000 up front and the rest in monthly installments over 5 years. I told him that wasn't acceptable and any payment plan would need to be a lump sum within 90 days, or the partition would proceed. Their attorney said that was impossible for his clients to arrange. I said that sounded like a personal problem. Tuesday, Helena sent me a text. Just one line. She said they'd never forgive me for this and I'd destroyed what was left of our family. I didn't respond. Wednesday, I got a call from Lana. She'd heard through some neighborhood connection about the legal situation with the house. She thanked me for being honest with her early on and said she was glad she'd gotten out before things got messier. She also mentioned that Helena and Xavier had refused to return her security deposit, claiming they'd used it for cleaning and damages that didn't exist. I gave Lana my attorney's contact information and suggested she might want to file a small claims suit. She said she'd think about it. The court date is in 2 weeks. My attorney says there's almost no chance Helena and Xavier can stop the partition at this point. They don't have the money to buy me out, and they can't force me to keep my ownership stake. The house will sell, probably at auction, and we'll split the proceeds according to our ownership percentages after costs. My attorney estimates I'll clear about $80,000 after everything is settled. Helena and Xavier will get about $175,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize they'll need to pay off their remaining debts, find a new place to live, and somehow survive on their limited income with no property asset. They're going to lose everything. The house they've lived in for 20 years, the equity they'd built up, the stability, all of it gone because they decided to steal from me and treat me like garbage. And I don't feel bad about it at all.